You're listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner, your source for investing made easy. Here's Andy Tanner.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Academy show. I'm Andy Tanner, your host, and this is where we do our very best to make investing simple. And we have a wonderful guest today, and we're going to talk about performance and personal development, self-improvement. We have Stein Jr., and Alan is an author and a speaker. He's a performance coach, spent 15 years working with basketball players in the NBA. And these are the big guys like KD and Steph and Kobe Bryant, guys like that. And through his programs, he transfers this unique expertise and maximizes both individual and organizational performance. So with that brief introduction, Alan, thanks for being with us on the program. We appreciate you.
Oh, my pleasure, Andy. It's great to be with you.
So I guess we got to start off with this. It sounds to me like you kind of have the dream job, right? Working with people like that. Give us a little bit of your background and what brought you to the point where A, you got to work with some of these guys, and then B, you have a couple of really solid books that we're going to introduce, Sustain Your Game and Raise Your Game. What brought you to decide to be a writer and a coach and serve people in this area of high performance?
Well, to put things into context, basketball was my first identifiable passion, and I fell in love with the game at 5 years old, and I'm so grateful that here 40 years later, basketball is still a major pillar of my life. And I was able to play basketball at the collegiate level. I played at Elon University down in North Carolina, and while I was a player at Elon, I started to develop an equal love for the performance side of the game, strength and conditioning, athleticism, fitness, nutrition, mindset. So when I graduated college in the late 90s, I thought, what could be better than combining my original love of basketball with my newfound love of performance training, and I became a basketball performance coach. And I chose to specialize mostly at the youth and high school age level because I felt that's where I could make the biggest impact. And I was very fortunate to work for two different high school programs here in the Washington, D.C. area that have produced over a dozen players currently playing in the NBA, Kevin Durant being the most notable. So I had an opportunity to work with some really elite level players and got to see a peek behind the curtain of what it took for them to work towards mastery of their craft and climb that proverbial mountain. That led to some work and some opportunities with Nike Basketball and Jordan Brand and USA Basketball. And I got a peek on the other side of the curtain where I got to observe and work firsthand with guys that had already reached that proverbial mountaintop, players like LeBron James and Steph Curry and Kobe Bryant and Chris Paul. So I got to see what they did to sustain excellence for long periods of time. So that's given me a very unique vantage point. And after doing that for 15 years, I was ready for a new challenge and to tackle something new. So I decided to leave the basketball training space and enter the corporate keynote speaking space. And that's what I currently do now. I'm a keynote speaker and author, and my main job is to translate all of the strategies and principles and routines and disciplines and mindsets that I learned from basketball's best players and coaches, and I show folks how they can apply those to their lives and to their businesses.
So the listeners might be in trouble because you and I are going to be peas in a pod, and they're going to have to listen to us talk about hoop. And go to Amazon.com. You can check out Alan's books. The first one is called Sustain Your Game, High Performance Keys to Manage Stress, Avoid Stagnation, and Beat Burnout. And then his first book was Raise Your Game, High Performance Secrets from the Best of the Best. And his website is alansteinjr.com. So my basketball claim to fame is kind of ignominious. I was the worst basketball player in the history of the University of Utah. But my coach, Rick Majerus, I was his favorite player. And the reason I know I was Rick Majerus' favorite player is he kept me on the bench to keep me safe. He didn't want me to get hurt. So he would keep me next to him, close to him on the bench. But as I look back at, I wasn't a great basketball player, but I'll tell you what, it's the most important class I took in college, and it was the most important instructor I had in college, was trying to compete against, just survive really in practice against those guys. And I think it was the single thing in my college experience, I didn't get much out of organic chemistry, but I got a lot out of competing and a lot out of the stress of having a real test each week on the road, right? And I think it really helped me in business. So whether you're a basketball player, a piano player, but anything that takes the grind, to be your best, I found is helpful. And I will just say this, Alan, I've been a teacher now of financial education for about 30 years. And I tell people all the time, I go, look, if you're going to go into entrepreneurship and if you're going to seek what it takes to be a better investor, you're going to engage in a process of personal development, because the same resiliencies, the same toughness, the same focus, the same ability to be in a routine, whatever you're going to do in life, whether it's to play the guitar, invest, start a business, high performance is a big deal. What do you have to say about that? I mean, when you say you're going to transfer what you taught Kevin Durant into teaching business owners, talk a little bit about that transfer. Is it the same?
Well, yeah, I'd be happy to, and I'm so glad you went in that direction. And before I do that, let me just say that you certainly played for and learned from one of the all-time greats. And I had the pleasure of speaking alongside Coach Majerus at several Nike clinics, and even had the opportunity to have dinner with him a couple of times. And you couldn't find a kinder, more authentic, more genuine man that coached for all of the right reasons. So you aren't kidding when you said that you had a master class taught by one of the best.
Well, and if you took you out to dinner, you ate well. I can tell you that right now.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there was no shortage of steak and wine at that dinner. It was pretty amazing. But to answer your question, the cool part is most of the fundamental principles that I've learned through the game and through these elite level players and coaches absolutely apply to every area of my life. They apply to fatherhood. They apply to me running a business. They apply to me being a speaker. And some of the principles that I learned from high performers, like a Kevin Durant, that anyone has the ability to apply to their lives, are things like a respect for the basics and the fundamentals. If you want to be good at anything, if you want to master any skill or work towards improvement in any area or any craft, you have to have a deep respect and appreciation for the basics and the fundamentals. Obviously, in the game of basketball, that's things like your footwork and your shooting mechanics. But in any area of life, whether it's in financial services or anything in between, you have to identify what are the basics and the fundamentals that make up the foundation to which the rest of this house is built. And you need to work towards mastery of those in the unseen hours. So that's certainly one trait. And another trait that comes to mind that I've learned from these elite level players that applies, ubiquitously across the board is they blend confidence with humility. They believe in themselves. They know that they've put in the work during the unseen hours to deserve the right to be successful and to compete at a high level, but they brush that with massive humility to the point where they're always open to be coached. They're always open to feedback. And no matter how good they are, they know that they can still get better. And that type of masterful blend between confidence and humility keeps them sharp and competing at a high level and performing well, but still continuing to incrementally grow and improve and evolve and get better. And the last thing that I'll say that I've learned from these elite performers is they've learned to get crystal clear on their goal. So the outcome, they get crystal clear on that to provide direction. But once they have their goal crystallized, they put it on the shelf and they put all of their focus into the process, into their daily behaviors, into the micro skills and decisions that need to be made on a daily basis that will get them closer to reaching that goal. So they understand the importance of results and outcomes, but they don't focus on them. They focus on the process and the steps that will increase the chance that they'll reach their goal. And that's something that certainly is really applicable in basketball, but is absolutely a non-negotiable in the financial space.
So, a phrase that comes up a lot in personal development, let's start with the physical. Pretty simple, not easy at all. For example, my major in college I never used. I went, did exercise physiology. And, the fact that I almost named my two sons Ben and Jerry tells you how that, worked out eventually. But the reality of it is eat less, move more. I mean, that's really about fitness. You eat less junk, you eat good stuff, you move and pick up heavy stuff, right? That's pretty simple. But easy, all of us have, it's almost like we have several brains in our head. We have a gut brain that says, feed me. We have a body brain that says, hey, I need to lay down and watch TV. You have another brain that says, hey, let's get up and go. So can you talk about, can you give anyone any insight on, the idea of discipline, the idea of integrity in moments of these choices, on how that's built? Kobe is a really interesting player, the late Kobe Bryant. I mean, that guy was kind of almost a cyborg. If he had a bad game, he'd go shoot till 3, 4, 5 in the morning and just on 2 hours sleep, show up the next day. That guy was absolutely a machine as far as discipline went, and what he ate and what he did, and the amount of work that dude put in off the, when the big lights weren't shining. Can you give us any insight on the development of how to tackle the idea of these basics being simple, but they're not easy?
They definitely aren't. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that is such an insightful distinction that's important for people to know, that just because something is basic, it doesn't mean that it's easy. People callously and casually use those words as if they're interchangeable and as if they're synonyms. But as you just so brilliantly pointed out, they are not. They do not mean the same thing. And your example was right on point. The principles of what it takes to have a high level of physical fitness is incredibly basic. Eat less, move more. I mean, it doesn't get any more basic than that. But to do those two things consistently, day in and day out, for not just months, but for years and decades, is very challenging to do. So I'm glad you made that distinction, and that is really important for folks to understand. Another thing that you brought up that I love is this concept of discipline. See, I kind of feel like in today's society, especially on social media, that motivation is over-indexed. It's over-glorified, and people rely too heavily on this need to feel motivated before they act. And I actually believe discipline is much more valuable, and unfortunately is under-indexed and under-glorified, because discipline is that's where the real juice is. And discipline comes down to making the best decision you can in that moment. See, people often make the mistake thinking discipline is wired in their DNA, similar to eye color or hair color or height. And I hear people say things all the time like, well, I'm just not that disciplined. And I let them know that's just a narrative that you've created. That's just the story you're telling yourself. Discipline comes down to a decision made in the moment. And the next opportunity where there's a fork in the road, the next opportunity you have to make a decision, in that moment, you can choose the more disciplined route. You can choose salmon and salad over a cheeseburger. You can choose to go for a walk with your dog over watching another episode on Netflix. You can choose to put some of your earnings into savings for a rainy day as opposed to buying something that you just don't really need. Those are decisions that anyone is capable of making. And very similar to a muscle in physical fitness, you can create some real momentum by making the more disciplined decision consistently. You'll start to build it like a muscle. You'll start to make more disciplined decisions regularly, and that will give you confidence to make them even more often. So discipline is something that anyone has available to them and can make that choice. Now, you did point out arguably one of the most disciplined human beings in the history of the world in Kobe Bryant. So I never want folks to play the dangerous game of the comparison game and say, I'm not as disciplined as Kobe Bryant. Yeah, very few human beings walking the earth are or ever will be. So that doesn't need to be the litmus test. But still, with Kobe, he was just maniacal, borderline obsessed with being as disciplined as possible in every area of his life. And we don't have to live up to that standard, but if we want to improve our lives, the very first step is to improve our discipline in the decisions we make with the things that are most important to us. And, one thing that I've learned, because generally speaking, I make mostly disciplined decisions in my life, but I'm certainly not batting 1,000 and far from speaking from a place of mastery. What I've also learned to do is when I make an undisciplined decision, I learn to forgive myself and give myself some grace and just, move on to the proverbial next play. So if I make the choice to do something today that's not as disciplined as maybe I would have preferred, that's okay. That one's behind me now. The next decision I have to make in my life, I'll try and do a better job.
We'll get to balance and alignment here in a moment, but I'm going to bring what you said for the listeners into the realm of what they do. I mean, most of our listeners either A, want to be entrepreneurs, or B, they want to become better investors. And I will just tell you, the things you just said are really interesting. It's almost like there's two gaps to bridge. The first one is the intellectual ascent to knowledge. That's a personal development deal. And you mentioned learning the fundamentals. The funny thing about that word fundamentals is in stocks, there's a phrase called fundamental analysis. And it is basically the ability to read a financial statement of a company and kind of say, hey, what are the basic fundamentals of the business? In Hoop, it might be your triple threat skills, or your ability to keep vision and stance or something. But in the in the corporate world, in the stock investing world, or in the real estate investing world, there's certain words to learn, like cap rate and NOI, and you gain this vocabulary and this understanding of the fundamentals. And then the second gap, and this is the one drives me crazy, is the difference between what I know and what I do. And that's that discipline we've been talking about. I know eat less, move more. I know that. You got to get out and do it. And so every investor, everyone I know, and I'm fortunate to hang out in some pretty cool circles of, I've got a couple of friends that both, have over $1 billion in their real estate portfolio. And people would be blown away at the amount of personal development that they do. So when people say, well, why would Andy have a high performance coach like Alan on the program? Well, it's to go and get his book, Sustain Your Game, High Performance Keys to Manage Stress, Avoid Stagnation and Burnout, and also Raise Your Game, High Performance Secrets from the Best of the Best. His website is AlanSteinJr.com, and you can get his stuff at Amazon. Now, here's an interesting thing. Nobody's perfect. I absolutely adore my coach, Rick Majerus, one of the main guys in my life. I mean, huge. And one of the problems he had, though, is he was maniacally obsessive. The sun rose and set in basketball, cost him his family, cost him his health, cost him ultimately his life, because he did not have a balance. He didn't have everything aligned right. So here on one hand, and this is important, because the whole reason to invest, the whole reason to be an entrepreneur is so that you own your business and that it doesn't own you. I always tell my sons, you got to be bigger than your money, because once your money gets bigger than you no longer have money working for you. You're working for it, and it can consume, make some bad decisions that way. And I look at my boys right now, they're 14 and 16, and my older son's kind of starting to hit his growth spurt. He's going to pass me. I'm 6'8", he's 6'6" as a freshman. And sometimes I want to say, son, it's okay to shoot, but my gosh, you got to come in and you maybe ought to take a girl on a date someday, or maybe you ought to read a book, that's just for leisure rather than trying to keep your perfect GPA and all this. How do you have this good combination of high performance, but make sure you're aligned and you don't burn? I'm worried that my son will burn out. Now, he hasn't so far, but I just want to say, buddy, you're going to burn yourself out if you don't relax a little bit here. So how do you manage this competitive world where, he's looking at all these guys in the AAU program, they're bigger and stronger, and so he's trying to catch up with them because it is a competitive world. And yet at the same time, don't get misaligned to where you burn yourself out. You got to have some fun while you're investing or playing the guitar or playing hoop or whatever you're doing, right?
Most certainly. I love that you used the word align several times there. And ultimately, that's what causes burnout. Burnout is caused from a misalignment between the sacrifices you're making and the hours that you're logging and the meaning that you find in the work or activities that you do. If you're not finding your work or your hobby in certain circumstances, if you're not finding it purposeful or meaningful, if it doesn't fascinate you, if it doesn't excite you, if it's not aligned with your core values, if you don't feel like you're making a contribution to something bigger than yourself, or to a team or a greater good, that's where burnout can stem. So it's not just from the long hours. So at present, my guess is your son is probably not at risk of burnout just yet, because he probably finds so much enjoyment and fulfillment and satisfaction from the game. But you are very correct in your assessment that he at least needs to keep an eye on that. And then as far as kind of lack of balance, I think that stems from going back to our core values and getting crystal clear on the things we value most. You know, most people say, and they only say this because it's politically correct and it's the thing you're supposed to say, they say my family comes first. But then when you look at their schedule and their daily behavior, you can see that that's actually not what they believe. They believe their work comes first, and their family usually kind of gets the scraps that are left over. And I only say this from firsthand experience, because I spent a portion of my career living that same illusion and delusion, and would tell people, yeah, my family comes first, but that's not the way that I behave. So thankfully, I've course corrected that. And, you know, now it just comes down to, what do you value? If everything you value comes down to your financial success and monetary success and being able to have some of the lovely trappings of life, like nice houses and cars and watches and vacations, and I'm not saying that with an ounce of judgment. There is nothing wrong with those things. But if those are your North Star, then your behavior is going to align with that, and you're going to do everything you can to pursue those things, which means you'll most likely work 60, 70, 80 hours weeks. You'll forego a date with your wife so that you can have that extra business meeting or call. You'll miss your child's soccer game or t-ball game because you need to meet with a prospective client. So it comes down to being clear on what we value. And, you know, I'm 46 years old, so, you know, I'm now at the point where, you know, I heavily value my time with my children. I heavily value my own personal wellness and physical fitness and personal development, you know, and so those things now, they're part of my North Star. So I want to perform just as well as a father as I do a keynote speaker and author. So I'm able to aim for high performance in different silos of my life, and doing so helps me create that harmony, that alignment, and that balance.
So there's a difference, let's talk about stagnation for a minute. One of the things I've watched, I was in an event once with a bunch of guys that were way more successful than I was, which is always good, because you never want to be the smartest guy in the room or you don't learn anything. And, I was blown away. I was even invited. I was looking around at the who's who, and I was like, holy cow. And the theme was really, you're either growing or you shrink. And, burnout's when you're just done, you just calories, the lactic acid in your spirit just build up and you're burnt. But stagnation is a little bit different. And, I get concerned about businesses that stagnate, economies that stagnate, currency, money. The very term currency is like the current of a river, an electric current. It moves. And what's interesting right now financially is we've got, massive amounts of money that's been flooded into the system. And if you look at the charts of money creation, I mean, it'll take your breath away. But what a lot of people don't look at is the velocity of money right now. The movement of money is lower than it's been even before I was born. The last, even you can go back into the 60s and money was moving faster than it is right now. We just have so much more of the system. So stagnation, being stagnant, can you talk about a little bit about that? Because I think people get stuck. They're not burnt out. They're just stuck. They're just stagnant.
Yes, they absolutely are. And I equate that to kind of, on the hedonic treadmill or just treading water, where you're exerting energy, but you're not really going anywhere. And that is definitely an issue. And what I found is, when most people refer to stagnation, they're talking about their outputs. They've stagnated in their productivity. They've stagnated in their results. They've stagnated in their mindset or their perspective or their attitude. And to me, the most effective way to raise up your outputs is to raise up your inputs. You need to go on the other side of the coin and ask yourself, what am I reading, watching, and listening to? Who am I surrounding myself with? I love the fact that you embraced going into a room where you admit you were the least accomplished person there, because now you're rubbing elbows with people that know things that you don't. that have had experiences that you haven't, that, have already forged the path that you're trying to go down. And I have so much respect and admiration for that, because I try and do the same thing. I try and surround myself with people that in some area of their life are further down the path than I am. And I want to try to emulate some of the strategies or traits that they embody, so that I can, attract that type of abundance into my life. So the very first thing you need to do when you're stagnating is reevaluate your inputs and say, what am I consuming? You talked about eat less and move more. That's kind of the basics for physical fitness. Well, for our mental and emotional fitness, you got to ask yourself, what are you feeding your mind? Who are you following or associated with on social media? What types of podcasts or shows are you watching? What are you reading, watching, and listening to? And if you can level that up, if you can jumpstart that and jumpstart the people that you're investing time with, that will usually jumpstart an increase in the output. So there is a direct correlation between inputs and outputs. And to me, that's the very first step to break out of stagnation.
Well, I think this is a great, this is actually a great crescendo, because when you listen to a podcast, at least I hope when you listen to this podcast, there's an action step for you, or there's something that a person says, in whatever episode it is, like, all right, I'm going to begin doing X, or I think I'm going to add Y to my life. And you make a very interesting point about consumption and the things we want to put in our bodies. My wife, luckily, since I don't know how much discipline she does, so we tend to eat healthy around my house these days. We're building bodies. But I had an interesting thing happen in terms of consumption. It really made me think about it, and I'll share it with you in the audience. Someone said, "Hey, you gotta see this thing called The Tiger King." And I said, "The Tiger King? You gotta watch that." So I get on Netflix and I put in a password, and I about 10 minutes into that, I thought, I am becoming more dumb by watching this stuff. I mean, what? I don't have that many brain cells to spare here. And I realized as I just kind of backed out of that, and I looked at all the Netflix stuff. And there was Better Call Saul, a story about a corrupt liar, a lying, corrupt, horrible people. And I thought, how many people just work their butt off at work, and they're so burnt or stagnated that they just want a dopamine hit. So they scroll endlessly on Instagram trying to find a dopamine hit, or they browse through Apple TV or Netflix endlessly to try to find something to stimulate them in escape, really, or maybe they're eating something at that same time just to get some type of a feel good moment, where that would be a pretty easy trade to say, you know what, I think I'll go on a walk and listen to someone's podcast that gives self-improvement. Or maybe I even go to Amazon.com and I think, you know what, I think I'll read Raise Your Game, High Performance Secrets from the Best of the Best. Or maybe Sustain Your Game, High Performance Keys to Manage Stress, Avoid Stagnation, and Beat the Burnout. So I appreciate that. Also, here at the Cashflow Academy show, we have a goal to help you grow your financial knowledge. So if you want to see how to put your investing education to action, we have a valuable web class that shows how we create passive income from stocks. So check out our free web class as well at investingwebclass.com. And you see how to generate cash flow and manage risk every step of the way. You'll enjoy that as well. You've been so gracious with your time, Alan. Let's give you the last word. If you could share something with, there's people listening right now that might be thinking about investing more effectively, or starting a business maybe, or maybe they feel they've given this a crack at it and maybe they are a little bit stagnant. Any last words, considering we've been through COVID, we got inflation now, and my feeling is resiliency is going to be a real key for a lot of people. We heard about what the Depression was like for our great-grandparents. As I look at the numbers where I sit, I think people are going to have the biggest economic challenge in generations. I think it's coming. I really do. And I don't say that to be a Chicken Little. I say that, more in the, like Paul Revere saying, hey, redcoats are coming, man. Anything you could say to these guys about personal development or the benefits of that? Or what would be your message as we close?
Well, I'll leave you all with something very, very actionable, and I've certainly enjoyed this conversation, Andy, and appreciate everything that you've shared. And, I think if darker times are coming, the best thing you can do now is try to insulate yourself and bulletproof yourself by working to become the best version of yourself so that you are high energy, you are optimistic, you are prepared to take on whatever life throws at you. And that's kind of the foundation of having grit and of being resilient. And the exercise I would love for people to do is, I'll make this pretty succinct and very analog, is you just take out a sheet of paper and you draw a vertical line down the middle. On the left side of the paper, I want you to list all of the activities that fill your bucket, mentally, physically, emotionally, the things that charge you up, that light you up, that give you energy, that you enjoy doing, that make you feel alive. This could be jumping on your Peloton bike or taking a yoga class, or maybe it's having coffee with a loved one or watching a documentary. Maybe it's meditation or prayer or taking your dog for a walk. But the things that you absolutely enjoy doing and give you energy, and make an exhaustive list of those things. Then on the right side of the line, on the right side of the paper, I want you to write down how you've been spending the bookends of your day, how you've been spending the first 60 minutes after you wake up and the last 60 minutes before you go to bed, your morning and your evening routine. And I want you to get pretty granular with how you spend that time. And then I want you to compare the two sets of notes, the two sides of the paper. And I want you to ask yourself one of the most important questions you can ask yourself. Am I doing the things that I know I need to do to be high energy and to be the best version of myself? And if you do this with some honesty and some vulnerability, you'll most likely start to uncover what's called a performance gap. And you teed this up brilliantly earlier in our conversation. A performance gap is the gap between what we know and what we do. So we know all of these things make us feel good and they give us high energy and they allow us to be our best self. Yet when we look at our morning and evening routine, we're not doing that stuff. So if you're one of those people that your morning routine consists of hitting the snooze alarm, hitting the snooze button twice, scrolling through social media while you rush out the door and you've got your breakfast in one hand as you go sit in traffic, and then your evening routine consists of binge watching Better Call Saul, can you start to sprinkle in some of the things on the left side of the paper into your morning and evening routine? And if you do so, it will increase your performance, it will increase your mood, it will increase your energy, it will certainly increase all of your outputs, and you'll simply be better weathered to take on the challenges that may arise, with a potential recession or anything else that may come our way. So if I'm telling you from firsthand experience and the thousands of clients that I've worked with, if folks are willing to sit down and do that type of self-audit, but then most importantly, put it into action and start doing the things that you need to do to be your best self, it will help you in every single area of your life.
What a fantastic exercise. I'd love to hear from people as they do it, how it's changed their lives. So you can certainly reach out to us and tell us how this has affected you. Also, make sure you go to Amazon.com and pick up. I love to read a book every week or every couple of weeks. I did not find that love in college because it was organic chemistry in the book. But when you get to choose what you want to work on and read things that truly, truly fill your spirit up, how resiliency is going to be important. In football, it's sudden change, a big turnover, got to bow your back, got to be optimistic, got to believe in yourself. Basketball, they make a run on you, you got to call that timeout and collect it. Same is true in your business and in your life. We'll need leaders. We'll need people who are positive, people who believe, and people who are ready to solve problems, not look to others to say, hey, how can I solve this? You got to be a leader. So fantastic conversation. AlanSteinJr.com is his website. We appreciate everybody listening. Hope that you gained something and some new ideas from our conversation. We'll see you next time on the Cash Flow Academy podcast.
You've been listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner. For more information on investing made easy, go to thecashflowacademy.com.